What's going on, everybody? I'm Patrick Chapla, founder of POWLAX and creator of POWLAX Master Coach, and in this video we're going to be showing you an amazing one-on-one drill that focuses in exclusively on what offensive and defensive players should do if an offensive player gains a step within a one-on-one, and it's called short 1v1s. So for short 1v1s, what we're working on is how offensive players should extend or maintain their advantage if they've gained a step within their one-on-one, and on the defensive side of the ball, we're going to show them exactly how we want them to recover and engage the offensive player. One of the additional really awesome benefits about this drill is that it's going to show our offensive and our defensive players exactly how we want them to engage the other in our one-on-one set so that they'll be able to be more effective as they're dodging or defending within any one-on-one. In this video, we're going to cover how to set up and run short 1v1s, talk about some of the objectives and techniques that each side of the ball should use, and then watch a couple of live videos and talk about exactly how we would coach the players within these videos. We can set up short 1v1s in almost any location around the field, but for our purposes, we're going to talk about just two, X and top center. To set up the drill at X, we're going to place 3 cones about 4 yards apart with the center cone on the back of the crease line. Then we will have our attack and defense line up 5 yards behind those cones with defensemen in the middle and attackmen on both sides. The first attackman and defenseman will step out and line up at the cones with the attackman on the outside and the defenseman in the center. To set up the drill up top, we are going to create the same cone setup at the restraining line with players lined up 5 yards above the restraining line. The drill will run the same way with the defensive players in the middle and the offensive players on the outside. If this gives your offensive players too much of an advantage and the defensive players feel that they can't contest the offensive players at all, you can add another cone in and move 2 sets of cones outwards, and this will give your defensive players more angle to work with, and then they will be able to contest the offensive players. Now that we know how to run the drill, let's talk about exactly what we are trying to duplicate from the actual in-game scenario. So this scenario comes from any time an offensive player gains a step on the defensive player. So as we look at the cones from behind the goal, the offensive player has less distance to get above GLE than the defensive player because the defensive player is going from directly behind the goal and the offensive player is going from just outside the crease line. So the offensive player's straight line to above the goal is shorter than the defensive player. So this is what creates our step advantage. And as we want our defensive players to play, we want them to be able to see this advantage, take good approach angles, beat the offensive player to a spot, and then be physical to force the offensive player out to the side or back underneath the GLE. For the offensive players, we want to teach them how to engage a defensive player, how to use specific dodges so that they can either increase their advantage or maintain their advantage, turn the corner, and then score some goals. Now let's talk about the teaching points from the defensive and offensive sides of the ball. On the defensive side of the ball, we're going to be working on approach angles, closing the gate, and bringing the physicality to the offensive players. There are 2 popular ways to train players to defend in this situation. The first is bump and run, and the second is engage and drive. We're going to cover the bump and run method first. When the whistle blows, D1 needs to take an angle through the crease and meet A1 at a spot just above GLE. D1 needs to resist the urge to water ski, which is a term used to explain being pulled behind the dodger. On the approach, just before engaging A1, D1 needs to break down into an athletic and balanced position and get his feet around to the middle of the field so that he can push A1 off his line towards the back corner of the field. The act of getting above and turning your body to the inside of the offensive player is often called closing the gate. To envision this, imagine the inside leg of D1 swinging around to close the gate on A1. We definitely do not want D1 coming in too fast or standing up too straight because then A1 can inside roll and D1 will run right past him. We want D1 to get a good push, and as he does that, he will then extend away and then prepare to re-engage and push again. He will shuffle upfield and try to put A1 between his shoulders, which are pointed to the back corner of the field. As A1 continues the dodge, D1 will re-engage and try to drive or bump him off his line again. Next, we will cover the engage and drive technique. This technique uses the same initial principles where D1 will take a great angle to meet A1 just above GLE. He will then break down and try to close the gate on A1. But this time, instead of bumping him, which creates separation, he will engage him and drive him outward towards the sideline and back corner while staying engaged. The key here is that D1 needs to keep his feet under him so he can adjust to whatever dodges A1 is trying to make. Now let's talk about the offense. Offensively, we're going to focus on our dodges in 4 stages: pre-contact, engage, dodge, and finish. But the first thing we're going to cover are the dodges because it will allow us to better explain the decision-making process of A1. The 4 most common dodges in this scenario are: first, rockers, hesitation moves, or fake rollbacks. This is where A1 will run upfield, fake like he's going to turn around and go underneath, and then explode forward over the top trying to turn the corner. Second is an inside roll. A1 will use this anytime D1 is approaching or engaging too far upfield by rolling underneath and getting to the front of the cage. It's imperative with inside rolls that players understand that they need to finish the dodge moving upfield across the face of the goal and not going to the sideline or behind the goal. The third dodge here is a Z dodge, or a step away and re-attack. A1 will use this if D1 does a great job beating him to a spot and closes the gate on him. To do the Z dodge, he will press into D1, jab step, and then step away to create space, and then re-attack D1's top foot, trying to turn the corner or get to the island. The fourth and final dodge for this scenario is the question mark. The question mark is where a player gets his hands free by throwing his stick towards the sideline away from his defender, stepping away and turning his body so that he can leave his stick on the outside, switching hands, and getting a shot or pass off. Now that we know the dodges, we're going to cover the decision making based on reading the defensive player and how we engage him. When the drill starts, A1 already has an advantage because he is a step closer to a good shooting spot than D1. Once the whistle blows, A1's objective is to maintain or extend his advantage before engaging D1. So, A1 will try to beat D1 to the spot D1 is trying to engage him at. A1 can add a rocker step at GLE if he thinks D1 will bite or slow up because it will give him a greater advantage. But if D1 doesn't bite on the rocker, A1 could allow him to get into a better defensive position. As A1 runs upfield, he should be low, ready to make contact and push through D1. This can be very hard to teach young players who often shy away from contact, but as coaches, we must teach our offensive players that being physical is as much an offensive attribute as it is a defensive attribute. The second aspect of this is how A1 will engage D1. We'll start with the 2 extremes. First, if A1's shoulders are above D1's when they engage, A1 should try to push through and turn the corner to get to the middle of the field. Second, if D1 is not broken down and his shoulders are far above A1's, A1 should allow D1 to run past him and inside roll to the front of the goal. Third, if their shoulders are even, A1 will want to engage and push D1, trying to get to the island. Fourth, if D1 has successfully gotten above A1, close the gate, then A1 should engage D1 and use a Z dodge, reevaluate, and re-attack, trying to get to the island. Finally, we will talk about finishing if A1 gets to the middle of the field or he gets to the island. If A1 gets to the middle of the field on an inside roll or by turning the corner, he wants to make sure that he does these 3 things. First, he cannot hang his stick and give the defenseman an opportunity to throw tail checks. Players can generate enough power to score by keeping their stick in front of their shoulders and snapping their wrists rather than pulling their stick behind their head, which opens them up for trail checks. Second is to get their stick to the middle of the field. This will give us more goal to shoot at. Third is to be deceptive by using fakes, shooting low, or wrapping the ball around the goalie. Goalies are trained to match stick inside, so using fakes to make them bite to one location before finishing in a different location will be very effective. At the same time, shooting high to low or wrapping the ball around the goalie inside is extremely hard for a goalie to save unless the goalie gets their feet or shin on the ball. Next, we will talk about shooting from the island. The first thing players need to do is get their sticks as close to the middle of the field as possible. If players are going to use a question mark and shoot with their outside hands, they need to make sure that they're in a good position where as they step away, turn, and shoot with their outside hands are still in a pretty good position to have some angle for their shot. Players should never shoot sidearm after a question mark because it eliminates a large portion of the goal that they are shooting at and they already don't have the best angle. Second, the island can be a great place to use the defenseman as a screen. One of my favorite shots in this position is to use a jab step into the defenseman and then step away and shoot over and around the defenseman. Now we're going to watch 4 live reps and talk about what we would want to teach and tell these players after they take their reps. In this specific clinic, we didn't have a goalie at the clinic, so rather than using a goal with a goalie, we just use a shoe mash goal. In the first clip, the offensive player gets a good step on the defenseman, and we would tell him to just turn the corner here rather than to immediately go to the question mark. We would tell the defensive player that he broke down too soon and should have tried to get above the offensive player and close the gate when he engaged. In our second rep, the offensive player does a great rocker and turns the corner nicely, but isn't balanced and ready for contact. We would tell him to get low and make sure that he is in control as he is dodging. He also has the option to roll back after turning the corner. For the defenseman, we would tell him to take a better angle and try to beat the offensive player to a spot rather than water ski behind him. In our third rep, we would tell the offensive player to engage the defenseman physically and try to get further upfield before trying to question mark. The defenseman didn't take a great angle but ends up in a decent position because the offensive player stopped. In our fourth and final rep, the defensive player does a great job beating the offensive player to a spot and giving him a bump. But as the offensive player steps away, he is not in a low athletic and balanced stance and is unable to recover to the offensive player's secondary move. From the offensive standpoint, we would tell this player to be more physical and get further upfield on the initial dodge, and that if he does step away and try to go underneath, he should try to get to the front of the goal rather than fading away behind. I hope that you enjoyed this video of short 1v1s and that if you run it with your program that you see the same type of improvement that we have with offensive players learning to be very physical and to turn the corner if they do gain a step, and then on the defensive side of the ball with players learning how to reapproach and re-engage players and then be physical and try to close the gate if the dodge is coming from X. If you want to learn more, check out all the other videos on POWLAXmastercoach.com. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for me, make sure to email me at patrick@powlax.com. And if you liked the video, make sure to share it. I'll see you in the next video.